I'm of two minds how I'm going to approach this week. By that I mean I may just go because the good news is these last two topic elements, action learning part one and part two, they're actually quite light touch. They're just information sharing, I suppose, is one way of looking at it, and giving you some processes on effective action learning in the workplace. That's critical, and they're also relevant to, obviously, as I said, the third part of your assignment. And to that end, as I reflected on this, I thought about this and I said, well, maybe I could give part one tonight and part two on Thursday night, and let the B group inform everyone that part one is up there. Try and have a look at this, by Thursday afternoon, kind of thing, and then I'll get part B done on Thursday night with that class live, and let you guys know that that's up and running, which means it gives you in actual fact, you'll have the material a week in advance, for all intents and purposes, because otherwise I'd be doing it next week. And I think that's more practical and more beneficial to yourselves. Just means a bit more work trying to process and get things out there for you, and keep track of it, and gives us a little bit more time as well. So I think I might go with that plan. It just means that you're going to find another hour to look at some stuff before, by the end of the week, or towards the end of the week at least. So as you're armed with more information to be able to continue with your assignment. Takes a bit of pressure off there. That's the ultimate goal, really, on that one. So on that, let me drop down to our place. And as I said, we're going to have a look at this action learning, and it's taking the future view, should we say, of reflective practice, things that you can do to enable it. Now, when I talk about action learning, you have all your formative learning, and the stuff that you're going through on these modules and so on. That's more or less formative learning. And in the workplace, there's a lot of learning goes on. You're learning new processes. You're learning different skills. You're learning from, you might move from one function to another function in an organization. If you're fortunate to be working with large organizations, you can have, several different options to you. I mean, if I take, in my own case, for example, with Ericsson, I went from, accounting to software engineering to hardware design and test, and then went to project management. And when I used all those together, I moved on then to business development, project management and business development inside another company for a number of years, and then went to the commercial side of things with Meteor at the time. So all along, I was learning stuff on the job for all intents and purposes. Now, here's the most important part of this: was that the learning that I picked up on the way. Now, I had my formative education going on, like, for example, the MBA in 2000, 2002, that time frame. So that was a badge, as I call it. So you're able to study, and you understand business and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. But subsequently, when I took more advanced learning, formative learning, as in a doctorate in this case, it wasn't that I was driven by the doctorate, but the doctorate was driven by me. And what I mean by that really was that all my learning took place in the workplace. And that's why it's what's considered to be it is a work-based learning doctorate. That's one way of describing it. It's actually a professional doctorate. In other words, I was trying to garner some and collect some of the academic stuff, but other depths of knowledge to enable me to perform better in my work environment. But integral to that was what was known as RPL. So all the learning that I would have picked up, how I did this project, how I, achieved that objective, and how I worked with this team, and so all of that contributed to this recognition of prior learning. And that carried a number of credits on my own particular program. And so it actually was, it was quite enjoyable. And by that I mean, I was after spending all these years in work and different roles and so on. And here was an academic institute willing to recognize all that stuff that I'd learned on the job. And that's what actually focused me a bit more into this action learning business, so to speak, because I said, there's so much stuff. And I come back to this Carla O'Dell book that I mentioned to you so many times before. If we only knew what they already know. And just going to zoom up a bit more while I'm talking at this. And I found that particularly fascinating, and that's what I started to study. And that's why I introduced these elements of this module into the program. They weren't originally there, but as we were developing this a couple of years back, I said, this is important because people have to recognize that they have value in the workplace. Their learning has value in the workplace. So we need to recognize that, and we need to bring it in. And, back in 2008, I think it was, I actually gave a number of my processes because I was just completing my work at the time. And I was partially involved, or well, I was involved with AIT. I was doing some errors with them and that. So they were setting up this RPL process and so on. So I gave them. I said, this is how we do it. This is how other universities have done it, or at least the leading university at this point in time was Middlesex. This is how they did it. So here, use the knowledge, and so on. So they built a version of it. It exists today. They've upgraded the processes themselves. It could be tweaked a bit better, I would think, and that's my opinion. But in any case, it at the very least, it provides a mechanism for you coming from your jobs to enable you to say, look, this is what I've learned. Recognize this and give me some credits and take some pressure off. So you might get part exemption or some exemption from parts of the modules, or it'll be built in and say, yeah, this is worth 5, 10, 15, 20 credits. I need a total of 360, or is it 560, I think, for doctorate level, 360 for master's level. So I've notched up so many credits, so I can take this module and then do that module, and then my work-based or my actual capstone project will be this, or this. So it has value, and I'm an absolute firm believer in action learning, and provided it's done effectively. It's also highly motivational in organizations. You can actually, I tracked it in terms of knowledge management. That was the background of my dissertation, and essentially what individuals learn, how that permeates out through the group, and that it goes through the department, then through an organization, and even to the point of intra-organization, so sharing knowledge and IP between companies, such that those two companies in the context of a supply chain, for example, work closely together to optimize their resources and so on. And this was all underpinned by, your own, let's say, appraisal, for example. What do you need to develop in your work, and how does that support the project, and how does that work? And if you take studies internally or work on specific projects, you develop more depth of competencies and capabilities, therefore you're contributing. So essentially, what does this all mean in English? It means that the sum of the whole far outweighs the sum of the few or the one or the individuals. So if you take 100 individuals and each piece that they know, put them all together, you actually know an awful lot more than just 100 pieces of individual knowledges and so on. And that's what we underpin for organizational learning. And then even at that, we can map and track how an organization is evolving. And then when we take assessments of these organizations internally, we can actually identify the areas, the competencies that we're developing, and how we're becoming more effective and efficient and knowledgeable of particular competencies, and those that are in areas that might be weak. HR might call it a skills gap analysis. That's too short. It's too it's because our competencies also include not just the people but also the processes that people use and processes that are in developed inside the organization. So we look at all of these in terms of evaluating the levels of maturity, and then we take our KPIs, performance indicators, and all this sort of stuff to be able to track how effective we're doing what we are doing and how we're improving on what we're doing, and so on and so on. So there's a multiplicity of opportunities and mechanisms that we can use to track all of this. And one of these areas it comes down to this, as we say, the action learning side of things. So when we look at this, let's start looking at it. When we talk about action learning, it's a powerful new tool. It's not really new for problem solving and building leaders, teams, and organizations. That's the underpinning of action learning. And if we take it then, we say we gain an overview of the principles and practices of action learning. That's what we're going to have a look at tonight, and examine how action learning differs from other organizational tools. And then, of course, explore the power of action learning in solving problems and in building leaders, employees, high-performance teams, and learning organizations. So it provides some of the background or backbone structures to enable you to do that. It's how you do this stuff, use these principles that underpins this high-performance teams, so to speak. And that really comes down again to the leadership, creating the right environment for people to take risk, try things out, look at things from multiple perspectives, and all this sort of stuff. It's I'll give you a very simple example. At the weekend there, the alarm went off in the house yesterday, and I was over in Maynooth, and I was thinking, I said, right, in my shed, which I keep partially open, we put the dogs in there at night into a kennel in there, which we put a latch on. And I was saying, wouldn't it be great if I developed a magnetic lock on that kennel, such that when the door is opened, the lock would automatically release and the two dogs will come out, so any old gobshite that's mad enough to hang around is going to be chewed up by two Labradors. That was the intention. I said, so I started to tease out the solution, and running current across and getting the right, so the magnet on the door would have to be broken when someone pulls open the door, if they break through the security lock, and break open the door, and that would break a connection, which would release the connection on the other side. I said, happy days. And that was one solution. Then I thought, well, maybe if I hooked it wirelessly into the existing house alarm, that'll send off alarms and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, one way. And then I slipped on it. And this morning, I was out looking at looking at the dogs and letting them out and all that. And I said, Jesus, Mark, why are you complicating life for yourself? There is a much easier solution. And I looked at the thing and I said, if I get one of those latches, the ones that you have to pull up and open the door or pull it out, it literally sits in a cradle. You literally latch it up. You see it on old gates years ago and all that. And it's still available and all that. I said, if I got something like that, and you put two eye hooks in it, run a cable through it, and run the cable out and when I'm closing the door at night, just close it so far and hook the cable onto another hook on the door, such that if they pull it out by more than 4 inches, it latches and the dogs come flying out. Simple solution, fraction of the cost of putting all the electronics. But that was the kind of, so I was actually putting the knowledge of what I was trying to do, conceptualizing it, and then saying, well, okay, I'll put this in place, and I literally tried it with a bit of string and so on, so action. So I learned from this is that this is the solution, rather than getting an overly complicated, quick and dirty solution. The only thing is I'll have a bit of a cable or a wire run across the ground, no big deal. It's only going across 6 feet. Happy days, jobs, problem solved. So this is the kind of thing. So putting morph that into an organizational context, and of course you're dealing with far more complex problems or issues and that needs solutions. So action learning itself, we describe it as a process, and I'm probably one of the biggest proponents of processes. The inputs and outputs are one thing, but essentially we need to have processes, good processes, effective processes, and flexible processes that can be changed. So we don't become slaves to the rigidity of a process as is stipulated inside in the manual. Depending on the scenarios, generally speaking, we shouldn't, because we need to allow that lateral movement of people to be able to contribute and think about what they're doing, and say, look, I've learned how to do this particular job, and this is how I'm actually doing. This is my action, and therefore I need to change the process, and I'm applying my action learning into developing and improving a process, for example. So it involves a small group working on real problems, taking action, and learning as individuals and as a team while doing so. So really now what we're putting in place is a process that we will follow to give us the bones of a learning opportunity in an organization. So the benefits of action learning: solve complex problems and challenges in a system thinking approach. Another big favorite of mine, systems thinking. Just a more, how to say, all-catching, flamboyant way of saying, looking at things and capturing as many perspectives, viewpoints as possible. So, I keep coming back to this sphere and getting out of, when we're talking about reflective practice, by the same mechanism. We need to be looking at problems from multiple different perspectives. That's why I mentioned that thing about the lock on the dog's kennel in the shed kind of thing. Looking at it, can it be done differently, and how could it be done differently, and so on. Now, if there was a team of us around, we'd probably come up with other solutions, probably more fanciful and neater and tidier and cleaner, whatever the case may be. So builds powerful teams. So when you have that, and when this is the critical point for the team leaders, you have to be able to identify people, the introverts, the extroverts, and so on, the plants, the negotiators, so on, all the different types of players in the team, and elicit the best out of those. Creating opportunities for people to be able to contribute in a safe environment. Enables individuals and teams to learn while working. So as they're teasing out a problem, solving the problem, they're doing it. So they're looking, and again, you're building something, you're coming up with a solution, but invariably you will be using your reflective powers and say, well, this is something I did before, and maybe if I try this and possibly do that. It's the experimentation part, or the action part of Kolb's cycle. This is where we're focused on at the moment. So it creates a corporate culture that can handle change and learns. So of course, when you enable people, and this becomes the de facto modus operandi. In other words, this is how we're doing things around here. We have this powerful, or this effective way of doing things, and we're allowed to try things out and learn from our mistakes and learn from our successes and so on. And that creates everyone starts beginning to take it. So that's where it's elevated all of it up to through the organization. And then develop leadership competencies, develop system thinking and creativity. That system thinking approach and creativity. So when you understand the components, the different perspectives, then you can become more creative, because you have depth of knowledge, and that's critical. And in the good old days, I don't know if they still practice it in companies, but you would have had succession planning and all that sort of stuff. So you'd have senior managers in different functions in organizations, or even the CEO, where certain people were groomed to take over in the eventuality that person is moving on or retiring or whatever. So they could be sent around to different subsidiaries and things like that, just to learn the business and learn how they do the different parts of the business and so on. And even moving out of different functions, coming out of, say, maybe accounting, or out of engineering or marketing, so they can appreciate, say, it's somebody coming from a marketing perspective, coming into operations, understanding what's going in there, spending some time. It's almost like job rotation for all intents and purposes, but it's grooming, and succession planning is the more official name for it. That's how we do it, in used to do it. But nowadays we need to provide that job rotation or flexibility for people to be able to learn more and contribute more. So in other words, that we have multi-skilled people in our organizations. And that's one of the biggest drivers in companies nowadays. So these are just some of the companies, throw away Novartis, Siemens, Boeing, and Caterpillar, all of these companies, all the way down. General Electric. I was talking about General Electric, to a class before you guys, on a master's class in strategy and implementation. And I was saying, if you ever see GE on a person's CV, snap them up. Because particularly if in any kind of management role, these guys, they have phenomenal professional development programs in-house in GE, and of course they're customized and designed for their own staff, but it's cracking stuff. I've been very fortunate to have worked with people from GE and be mentored by them, and they're second to none. And of course then you have Samsung and American University. These are just Ericsson, again, would have had these kind of mechanisms in place. So what are the components of an effective action learning program? Well, the building blocks we have inside here are project, challenge, task, or problem. Whatever we have to do. Could be a 3-month, 6-month, 2-year project. Whatever the issues are, it could be a particular task, could be a fault, it could be a group of people designed to fix faults or fix problems with a product that's already out there, or whatever the case may be. So you have an object, you have a goal, an objective, one of those in group A. Usually groups of between 4 and 8 people. And as I say, from diverse perspectives, comes back to what I was saying before, multifunctional teams, represented from different parts of the organization that are key to us. So in the project idea, we do mix and match from different functions inside an organization, and that's where we have these cross-functional teams, and that's what they're essentially talking about here when we talk about diverse perspectives. And again, even if it's in a very narrow perspective, by that I mean if it took maybe 4, 5, 6 engineers from a particular group or a subset of a group as such to try and solve a problem. Again, they might be of different backgrounds in engineering and different types of engineers, and of course different levels of experience. That in itself can be a very specific group with enough diversity in the group to contribute to something that would be effective and meaningful, or have a novel or creative solution. So here we come up to it again: reflective questioning and listening. Now we'll come into some of these later on again, but again, it's that slowing down of pace such that we think and listen to what's being said. We go to the Secchi model, we internalize what somebody else is saying, and we make the questions, and this is in through the listening part of it. And when we've internalized stuff and we've made some internal sense making, when we've completed that element of it, we understand it. Then we'll ask questions to augment what we already know if we're missing bits. So it becomes very, very focused. We're not just throwing out questions superfluously just for the sake of saying something, which can often be the case, unfortunately. I'm here, so I'll ask about the weather, therefore they know I exist. But more importantly, that it's focused attention, because you can achieve an awful lot in a very short period of time when you're following these types of processes, rather than and this is where the leadership inside here is absolutely critical to keeping people focused on the actual problem and not going down dead ends, as often can be the case, rabbit holes. And then as a leader, keeping the pace and momentum. This is the time management element of the reflective practice, for example. So as a leader, you're able to slow down and pace it up and so on. So that's when you're reaching this level of high performance teams, and it's the sweet spot of team performance, the A team, not the crowd on television, but inside and work. So select purpose, creating solutions, and taking action. So then, commitment to learning. So what have we learned from this? Now, we might document our solutions. We might put them up on a whiteboard. We might experiment them with them and derive some kind of result. But one of the more formal methods that I've used, and I've called it this opportunity for improvements. I introduced it into project management meetings many years ago in our own companies, but in any case, or the companies I worked with, it was a way of explicating tacit knowledge. So when we've come up with a group solution and so on, we'd documented, and or we changed the process or whatever the issue was. We use this mechanism and we put it into a central repository such that other projects or people or teams or groups could look at it and say, oh, that's how Mark's team worked on that, and I see how they've come up with that solution, and this is the process they used. Maybe we can adopt that in this similar type situation, and try it out. It might work for them or it might not. In any case, they'd write a document and say, Mark's solution didn't work for us, but here are the dynamics of our situation, and this is why it didn't work for us. Or it worked and we've made some other modifications to the process. See how this is evolving into better processes, better knowledge, but we're able to tap on it. And most importantly, we've already started to provide a mechanism to swap what's in people's minds out into the open. It's made explicit, and that's one of the key areas in an organization that you try to tap into. How can we get people's knowledge out and open such that others can pick up on it and follow the processes? That way you mitigate all sorts of and you have issues that could, if Mark got sick, if Mark got knocked down, or he got blown off his bicycle on Sunday morning down in the middle of Kildare, and where would we all be for this reflective practice in the workplace module? Panic. No, but I have everything written out and so on, so people could take over, I think. So then you have to have an actual learning coach, and really this is the leadership inside there. But once the coach is versed in the techniques, you as a leader, this is why I'm introducing this to you, so you can use this or something similar or some of the approaches, if not all of them, to effectively build team learning inside in your organizations or in your groups. So statement one, as we say, 2 ground rules for the coach. We set down statements only in response to questions. Anyone can ask a question. First and simple rule. So simple statements, and keep them short. No meandering, no long. So do you remember these issues we'd have of word counts? This is kind of analogous to that. In other words, to just be precise and accurate, none of the fluff. And I'll have to say that I've noticed in the last while, and now I'm blaming it on COVID. Jeez, I'll blame everything on COVID. But when someone is explaining something, I actually find myself getting to my stop. Tell me what. No, precisely. Stop. Jesus, stop going around the freaking bend, driving me around the bend. Just get straight to the point, kind of thing. Maybe it's an old thing, an old person's thing, but it's and time is getting shorter, so just get straight to the point. But that's essentially it. Getting straight to and as a coach, being aware of this, that you don't let rambling statements go off and people begin to wonder, where are we going with this, and so on and so forth. So keep them short and succinct. So actual learning coach has the authority to intervene whenever he, she, or it identifies learning opportunities. So if we see that someone says something and says, maybe we could look at this problem from that perspective, and this might be an effective route to coming up with partial solution or complete solution, but they see that there's an opportunity for someone to learn, or someone is stating something, and as a consequence, other people, and if you're scanning around with the other players on the team, you might see the quizzical look on the face. Remember non-verbal communications, and you say maybe I don't know if there's a Helen on. Anyway, Helen doesn't quite understand what Mark is saying. They're not able to internalize it. They can't make enough sense of it. So now get Mark to expand a little bit more the right questions, and therefore Helen, fictitious Helen, could actually learn from what Mark's saying, and then you might say, okay, so now they've learned something. So you've provided that little granular opportunity for that person. So you'd have to look around. You might find that 3 or 4 people are there to say, Jesus, what's he talking about? And so on and so forth. And then stop. Mark, can you expand on this point or that point or whatever it is, such that the other people can go, and then scanning around, watching to see the reactions with you now, and so on, and watching body language and so on, inside. That's what really effective action learning coach does, or a team leader. It doesn't have to have this grandiose name of an action learning coach. It's a team leader. It's just damn good leadership. So How action learning differs from other problem solving groups. So, learning and team development as important as problem solving. So, it's a two sides. So, even though we were talking about the end goal being a solution, a project, a problem, or a challenge, or whatever the case may be, but in parallel, we have the team, the way the team is coming to the problem solution. That is equally because you can improve that process. They may not become the best solutions each time. They may not come up with they may have to redo it, but in any case, it's how the team is performing that you can really tap into that, and they become better at it. And you, as an integral part of the team, you can actually influence that cyclical process of learning within the team itself. So groups charged with implementing as well as solving real problems. So this is kind of a throwback to the days of the consultants back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, Jesus, consultants were two a penny. It's still are actually. Half of them are useless. But anyway, that's only my opinion. But companies just hire in consultants to solve some kind of an issue, organizational issue, and so on. And these consultants come in and they'd write a big report, glossy production of it, and hand it to the management. Big fee, thank you very much, happy days, off I go into the sunset. And a company was left to implement them. And oftentimes there might be some hard decisions to be made inside there, and none of the managers really wanted to take on those hard decisions. And it became a disjointed effort. And I spotted this happening inside in Ericsson, and what they did in their case was that, right, they restructured the consultancy partnership as such, and hired on consultants the odd time to help us with whatever the challenge was. And they wrote a report, and they shared the report with all concerned, and then they had to implement their recommendations. So that kind of put the frighteners on some consultants. So it weeded out the good from the not so good, or as I would say, the pure rubbish, the bullshit brigade, and it weeded out that level of stuff. So the fee structure became a change in the process of how we engaged, and that enabled us to be able to pick a little bit more into the brains of the consultants on why they did this and why they suggest that and how they would implement this, because they might have done it in other companies and so on. So membership not reserved to experts or involved people. So you could draw in people that you think might have some contribution outside the immediate group, such as a consultant or another work colleague, or someone that might have experience in a previous organization in a similar type challenge, and they may have something to contribute. Questions proceed. Answers dialogue over discussion and debate. Okay, so dialogue over discussion and debate. So ask questions, listen, more questions, listen, and absorbing, because each time we ask a question, we're creating a knowledge. We're creating new internalizations of bits of knowledge for each individual, and the group is learning more and learning more and learning more as the process goes on. So the learning coach with power, throwaway comment, but they have a certain level of, I won't say a control, but guidance to be able to not allow it drop down into big discussions and debates and going off on challenges and fracturing the group. Because sometimes then you get personalities coming out through debates and he who shouts the loudest and all that sort of stuff. So the leader can actually quell that or subdue those types of behaviors and keep focus going. But has to be done, professionally. In by that I mean. They're not standing there with stopwatch and saying, now ask these questions for 2 minutes and answer these. None of that type of stuff. Or beating the table or slapping a meter ruler off the table and saying, now we move on and all this. It's not an overlord approach. You have to be really tuned in. That's why you need to have, fine-tuning your empathy and emotional intelligence is central to being a good leader, and particularly in these types of situations. So action strategy requires system thinking, which is a repeat of what we said earlier on. So problems and challenges for action learning. Important to the organization or individual, not a made up exercise. Okay. Don't introduce it just for the sake of, we're now introducing an action learning process in the organization. We're going to be the best thing since sliced pan, or that type of thinking, stupidity as such. The drivers are the problems that need to be solved and the team that's put around solving the problem. It should almost be a transparent thing. You can have processes and say, right, we have this problem solving challenge and this is how we're going to go about it, or problem solving technique or process and so on. And even if you have to disguise it as an action learning, that's probably the wrong word to use in it, but you can bring out the learning side of it and say this is an opportunity for us to improve. Even the word improvement can be substituted by, or learning can be substituted by improving or improvement. So continuous improvement program to find out how we're doing what we're doing and contributing to Six Sigma. In many respects, the likes of Six Sigma processes has this built into it because it creates these opportunities. So the more complex in nature, the more powerful and valuable is action learning, of course, because you're getting multiple perspectives. You're getting the right people around to contribute to the problem solution. And problems should be feasible and within the authority and or responsibility of the group. And again, this is the practical side of the leadership and the team itself. You remember I mentioned it before that, when students will be asked to do SWOT analysis, they come up with all these great grandiose and the usual blurb from textbooks and so on, and I said, yeah, all very fine, and you'd have multiple versions of all the in all the boxes, 10, 15 bullet points in each of the 4 boxes of a SWOT analysis, and you'd say, geez, that's a great assignment. It's a load of horse's ass. And simply because the more opportunities and problem solutions you come up with, then you have to go through another exercise of trying to prioritize those, and then you have to come up with a criteria of how you're going to prioritize those. And you're saying, Mark, where does it all end? Exactly. It goes on and on. So really, if you're coming down to 2, 3, maximum 4 feasible or actionable solutions, and actionable by when you consider that the team, that the constraints you might use would be limited budget, limited time, limited equipment and resources, and say this is what we've got to play with. If you remember, one of the best scenes of that movie, Apollo 13, and when they started to run out of oxygen and they needed, they were potentially going to have carbon monoxide poisoning, and they needed to come up with these carbon scrubbers. And there was a great scene where they were told, go down to a room, solve this problem, and the project leader said, come up with a solution. These are all the bits, and they threw down the bits of tape, a couple of boxes, a bit of piping, and so on. So, that's all you've got to play with. And the guys looked, put all the engineers from different backgrounds together. It's a phenomenal scene. Really, I should try and strip it out of the project and upload it into project management module, because it absolutely explains all of this and effective project management. What did they do? Have come up and they run down the corridor and bits falling off the box, and this is where the solution they came up with the limited resources. Kind of like the impoverished managers working environment. Not quite, but it creates the opportunity. So feasible, in other words, they have to be actionable. And so if you come up with an idea, you don't pass the buck to somebody else or some other team to come up with a solution. We developed it, we want to now implement it. And that in itself is a great motivator, because people can see the results of their actual effort, the planning, the work, the solution, and then the actual experimentation, and then the result of the experimentation, how they're actually getting something and seeing it physically or process-wise operational. So examples of problems for action learning: recruiting high-tech workers, for example, developing training programs for leaders inside an organization, improving information systems, IT systems, Six Sigma projects, taken off at the right size. You'll have an overall Six Sigma guru inside your organization, probably a consultant, but he will lay the groundwork for all of the Six Sigmas and the processes that need to be put in place, small step-by-step breakdowns. Improving customer service, another example, resolving conflict between departments. God knows how often that goes on, and the blame game going on inside there. Um, they within weeks of working in Meteor, I could see that this was an issue up in Riverwalk and Kingswood, and the problem was there are two separate locations. The Kingswood was the pure techie side of the building, and the Riverwalk was the softer skills. Our area, marketing, product management in my area, and we also had HR and finance there, and fraud control, and I think that was it. Was there and so yeah, sales and marketing. So they were the soft side. So and what how to say, triggered my interest in that was the comments. We'd go over. I went over to from Riverwalk over to uh, Kingswood and met up with the engineers and the IT guys and the operational engineers, and the kind of banter going on the slag, and said, "Oh, how's the Super Brigade now? Have you been out for a game of golf? And how many big deals have you done this week and all that sort of stuff?" And I said, "Interesting. I wasn't outside the door, and there was none of that sort of stuff going in." And but I observed all around that all the lads were in for the most part jeans and t-shirt. Was fine. That's all they needed. And you come over to our place, it was like the Super Brigade. So straight away I could see that there was I would say a cultural difference between two. So to break it down through project methodology, cross-functional teams, I brought the two entities together and dispelled a lot of the perceptions that were going on inside there. And because I was bringing the technical people over to Kingswood, over to Riverwalk, and vice versa, bringing the sales, I mean, I on my own product and managers, we all had to spend time in customer services over in the techie building to understand what the customers were seeing. Those kind of simple mechanisms provided an opportunity for learning each other's roles. It was almost like trying to carry out a mini MBA in situ, so people get a deeper understanding of the different functions inside an organization, so they'd have an appreciation. So and it was remarkable to listen to some of the comments, particularly from the tech guys, saying, "Geez, we didn't realize there was so much inside in the market. We thought it just draw the few diagrams, get a few glossy leaflets and happy days." But the amount of data research and data mining that had to go in and to focus a particular marketing campaign to before we spent a penny of money, resources, and so on. And likewise, the people thought, it was only a piece of code writing or this, that, and the other thing. But the complexities of the steps they had to go through and introducing a piece of technology, testing it out, making sure it works correctly inside in our environment, testing it further, and so on. So there was an appreciation of the different functions because they got more insight into how other people and parts of the organization worked. So that's one of the ways of resolving these issues in companies cross-functional teams. Developing a new performance appraisal system and establishing work schedules. Now, the work schedules I finished first is because that's quite simply through a good project management methodology inside an organization. So people are assigned activities and they know what they have to do, when they have to do them, and the deliverables and so on. That's easy stuff. Developing a new performance appraisal system. Been there, did that. And one of them, as I say, the more effective mechanisms we use would have been a combination of Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, and 360 performance appraisal. Now, I'm not going to ask, some people might have come across these, might be using them all the time and so on, but just to keep the show running, 360 performance appraisal system involving people in the team. So let's say you're a team leader, asking people, other members on the team, what they think of you as a leader, asking your line managers what they think of you as a leader, asking other people outside your function, how does Mark interact with in his role as a leader of that team with your area. You'd actually agree who you'd be talking to with your line manager. So he might suggest, I'd like you to get the feedback from such and such a person, and you might say, not to go there. Maybe we've had there might have been some issue before, or you don't have as much interaction with that person, therefore you don't feel they'll contribute more, and you might suggest somebody else, and the manager say, okay, but he's the best buddy of yours, and so on. So let's come up with a name. So you come up with a group of people, half dozen or so of feedbacks, and then we would have a system where you yourself appraises you appraise yourself against criteria, and then we evaluate how close you are to the aggregate of all the other feedbacks. And based on that, then we can identify how really well you know yourself and how good you are on your job based on how well you know yourself. And that's one mechanism or part of the appraisal system. The 80-20 rule was that if I'm in a team or I'm a team leader, then as an individual, and let's just say we're on the lower rungs of the organization, we might have 80% of our appraisal is based on our own individual performance. The other 20% could be broken down with, say, 10% on the team's performance, 5% on the department or function performance, and 5% on the overall company performance. So you'd have these opportunities so if the senior managers in the organization played a cracking role and the company performed exceptionally well, then you were in for a slice of that 5% at the top end. So because simply as a should we say at the lower rung workers are, in the company, you have less influence on the higher ordinate decisions. Now we reverse that for the senior managers. They'd have the 80-20 rule as well, so, or maybe even 90-10. So 90% of their performance is based on how the company performs or how their function performs, and 10% might be on their performance as a manager, as a leader at the C-suite, C-level of the organization, chief executive officer, chief financial officer, chief operating officer, and so on. So it was, and even from the different levels on the way down, so you'd have the different percentage splits going down depending on the layer of or the hierarchical structure of the organization, and oftentimes you try to keep that pretty flat as well, so you wouldn't have very complicated and over cumbersome systems. So I'm going to be shot for saying this. It wasn't quite like P-PARS. Different systems for every. Oh, jeez. Anyway. So, two types of action learning programs. So you have a single loop in a company, or you have multiple problem of one or more organizations. So that's just where you might involve other organizations. You might have to call in consultants. You might be working with a partner organization or a specialist company and so on. But generally speaking, the single loop is within one problem, one team, one solution, or multiple solutions. And again, just to regroup on this, we talk about 4 to 8 members. And the reason, again, that was fundamentally based on the diversity of people in the group. If they were all engineers let's say they were all software engineers, various ages, years of experience and so on, but they're all software engineers, you could probably double that number. Or maybe more. If you're in a factory and manufacturing environment and they're all on the same process line doing fundamentally the same line, you could have 30-40 people in the team. Is that effective? Generally speaking, no, because it becomes too homogenous, or it's like having a thoroughbred dog or animal as such. They're so finely bred that the slightest thing can upset them as such, and that's a different way of thinking of it. So we tend to come back to this 8 as 8 to 12 as being the optimal number of relationships you can have. So when you have very diverse backgrounds, then as a leader and as a team, going outside that number becomes the levels of complexity of the relationships between the one-to-one and one-to-many becomes almost exponential upwards in with relationships, and it can put too much of pressure on the team leader or manager to try and manage all those different backgrounds and so on, and they won't have the knowledge of all of those different backgrounds, so that becomes important. So from within and outside the organization, you say, so diverse as to obtain fresh viewpoints. The pizza man, get someone outside the org, and it's got to be said, sometimes you can ask a total stranger in and say, look, this is what the problem is, what do you think, and so on, just for the feedback, and see, are they saying the same thing? Because we try to avoid getting into the groupthink behavior, and sometimes we need to step back. Remember I mentioned, I think it was on Saturday or last week, I said, every so often to take a break, get out, walk around the building, whatever you have to do, just to go away, clear your head, think of things, whether you're in groups 2 or 3 or whatever, come back in again and say, we were just giving some thought to this, and this is what we thought, and so on. So we might change this parameter, change that parameter or variable in the solution, and may include in external resources when needed. Sometimes it can be effective to bring in an external facilitator or action learning coach just to provide some technique, and that can have its positives as well, because you feel that there's more democracy within the team when you have an external person coming in, and the external person might be from a totally different department or different function inside the organization, or indeed an external consultant can also do the same thing. But sometimes it can be a bit of a refresher. So attributes of group members. I'm just watching time here. So committed to solving problem, carefully listening to one another, making sense of people's answers, willing to develop and learn. So they see it as an opportunity. Not to have, let's just say, their vulnerabilities exposed, but to augment what they already know, however large or little, in relation to the particular problem or scenario. Being respectful to others, of course, that goes without saying. Constructive and supportive, and group rather than individually focused. So everyone adds their tuppence in, but the result is from the group. Now, on the dark side of that, what kind of concerns me on that is that it should be presented as a group effort, because sometimes, unfortunately, individuals or some managers can hijack the outcomes to promote themselves. So they might do it once, might get away with it twice, but that's it. So don't fall into that trap to project yourself as the white-haired boy or person or whatever it is inside there. So it's humility goes a long way insofar as it wasn't me, it was the team and all that, and you'll see that. You just watch any professional athlete, even if it's an individual win, they'll always, one of the first things that come out, thanks to my team, they've done this, that, and the other thing for me, got me into this position that I was able to win, and blah 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 blah. We need to have that humility, recognition of the individuals and the team itself, to and that's the most positive way you can actually approach moving things. So questioning and reflective process. Questions before solutions, so as to diverge in a systems perspective rather than coverage too quickly. So pacing, time management, think about stuff, asking the right questions, adding to the body of knowledge you already have, and then asking more questions to augment what you think you don't know or actually don't know. Reflect to listen, to be creative and to learn, and then seeds of solutions reside in the questions. So the types of questions, so you can, the way people sometimes are questioning things, you can see, we won't say the motive of why they're questioning, but you can see the pattern or trend, and you could see the direction they're going, and you can actually assimilate that, so you can actually preempt the possible solution based on the types of questions that are being asked, and particularly as the actual learning coach or leader or manager, team leader of the group, you can actually identify trends, but of course the other people will be identifying. So if they hear Mark asking particular questions, the colleagues, and if you've worked before, I see where he's going with this, and you might interject and add something else in, so you begin to get this momentum going. That's where you're beginning to move into this high performance team behavior. Time and space needed to stand back, reflect, unfreeze, and gain new perspectives. As kind of borrowing from Kurt Lewin's old model of unfreeze, change, and refreeze process, but it's the same thing. Take time, assimilate what we already know, then review it, check it out, plan, do, check, act, plan, do, check, act, iteratively cycling through it, and each time we're learning something, but we put a time limit on it, because we could be continuously going around in this uh, increasing knowledge loop. But we have to remember there are customers or people or clients depending on our solution within a particular time frame. So we must need to know, or there's a must to putting a time constraint on when we said enough is enough, in insofar as we've got a solution, it's actionable. It might not be the cleanest, might not be the nicest, and so on, but it's a solution that works. Otherwise, you could be playing with the solution, or as engineers will keep playing with technology and playing with it until and refining. But the should we say the what's the word? The law of diminishing returns kicks in. You're putting more and more effort in for ever so slightly smaller increments in the solution, or whatever the case may be. So you have to know when you're reaching that point. So questions essential for understanding and reframing the problem. So working on the right problem. So from the very outset, be clear as to what the problem is. Oftentimes we can go through that phase of the meeting to clearly define what the problem is, and making sure that we're full, because there can be many side issues, and sometimes they can disguise the root cause of the problem. So delving down until we find out precisely what the problem is, and then rebuilding up. Myths of the blind man and the elephant. That's a story about the blind man and the elephant. A couple of blind men trying to describe an elephant. One feels his tail, one feels his trunk, and so on and so forth. Now try and pull them all together to say, can they come up with an elephant or some other weird and wonderful animal creation or something like that. But that's the myth of it. So how well we describe and clearly articulate and identify the components such that we can piece it all together for a final solution. Then questioning each other is only way to get agreement on the problem. So and that again comes back to, the plant in the group, for example, or as I often refer to them, the black sheep. The person will say, but you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do this, and the other group members say, oh Jesus, here he is off again. Mark is moaning, whinging, and giving out, and always pointing out problems and issues. Extremely valuable, because it divides the group think. Now, of course, an action leader or a manager in an organization can spot this and allow Mark to have his say and say, he's pointed out some key issues here we've overlooked, or we should have considered as well. And when you placate that, then Mark goes away with a reasonable reputation intact, and doesn't be seen as the usual whinger and moaner going on and all the time creating problems. But they see things from different perspectives, and that's the important thing, because we don't want to be making mistakes and having to redo. There's nothing. That's a big waste. Of the 7 wastes in an organization is rework. Same problem here. If you don't come up with the right solution, you have to go back and rework it. You've wasted time, you've wasted money, and so on. So understanding the context as well as the content of the problem. So how did this particular problem happen? What, in what type of situation, and could it recur in a different type of situation or not? That's the importance of it, because you might come up with a solution for that context, but the solution might not work in a different scenario or context. So the power of questions, quite simply, creative problem solving and systems thinking, multiple perspectives and viewpoints. And of course, you have build group cohesiveness, listening and respect, increased reflection as we're going through at the right pace, talking about problems, digesting, internalizing, allowing people to think of alternative solutions from their past experiences, amalgamate that level of knowledge, creating this metadata, asking a question based on this metadata to augment what they already knew, what the new information that they're after receiving, and additional information, and then talking and sharing out. And so increased reflection, learning, and change. And where are we now? That's that, and this is me closing up here. What a performance. Look at that. Is that 33 or 39? 33. 1 hour. Any questions, comments, or insults, folks? that. It's a very, very good technique. It's worth knowing at least the elements of this, or understanding the generic process that you can apply in future opportunities. So the next time, for example, you have an opportunity to solve a problem or come up with a solution or whatever things, you might give credence to this type of approach, and putting form and structure around it and producing a report and say, look, this is the solution, but here's how we came to the solution, and so on, because that's as equally as important as the solution itself. And maybe you've done it in your organizations, maybe it's new to you, or maybe it's a variant of what you've done in any shape or form. But in any case, it's another piece of learning that you could use, And
Yeah, with everybody working, or a lot of people work from home, what we've just gone through is probably much more difficult to do. Would you agree with that?
Interestingly enough, in part of the ways, yes, but you can make it more effective if you're all on camera. That's important, because then you can, if you have a group of 4 or 8 people and you're all visible on camera, it'll work. But if you have somebody turned off, or freeze framed, or whatever it is, then there's always going to be is Mark here, or is he gone making coffee, or is he actually here? His mic is turned off as well, and that kind of stuff goes on, So to give the how do you say, the respect to the process, it will work remotely if you're all visible on camera, but it requires good mediation. In other words, the person controlling it, whoever calls the meeting and so on, has to be careful. Now, we've seen the some of those videos, for example, where was it one of the town council or whatever it is in the UK, and the lads started shouting and they were throwing them out of the meeting and silencing them and all that sort of stuff. Again, it comes down to good moderation and keeping focus, on the meeting. So it has its downsides, but I also believe it can be done effectively, and I think we need to adapt to that way of doing things, given the way things are unfolding, and even regardless of COVID and restrictions and remote working. I think this is going to become a fundamental way of working, over the next while, and people are going to look for that probably in their terms and conditions, that I want to be able to have flexibility to work from home and take more control of my own behaviors and so on, lifestyle. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully that answered your question, Liam.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay. Listen, I'll let you go, and I keep an eye on this place, on the Moodle page. As I said, I might go with version part 2 on Thursday night and upload that for you as well. So and as I say, have the time to deliver, but increase the time and use some of this material, as I said, when you're looking at the 3rd part of your assessment. Okie dokie, folks. On that, I'll let you go, and we'll talk to you next week, please God.
Thanks.
Cheerio, folks. Bye bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
bye.
Mark.